Hello, everybody, and welcome to these three tiny heads. Today, we are going to talk about things that we want to share. I don't think we're going to have any particular theme today, apart from the ancient metrology and some numbers and some things like that. So, I'm very happy to introduce to you guys, if you don't already know him, Matt. Say hello, Matt.
Hi, guys.
And this other weird guy at the bottom, Dane. Say hello, Dane.
Howdy.
Howdy.
Hey, guys.
We were just talking off camera that we've been coming across numbers like 666 and 888. I just actually posted something about 888. I will read it.
Yeah.
I found some pillars in a graveyard somewhere, and they've got all these numbers all over them, hidden in gematria and like sopsophy and stuff like that. So I recently found a calculation that is the Shakespeare code calculation, which is 426 add to 462 equals 888, and minus 264 equals 624. So this is the kind of weirdness that I'm getting from these triple digit numbers. I understand why it happens, and it's because when you're taking numbers like 426, 462, you're kind of balancing out those numbers. So 4 and 4, if you think 462 and 426 on one side, 462 on the other, you add the two fours together, you'll get 8. You add 2 to 6, you get 8, and then you add 6 to 2, you get 8. So that's why it's happening. And then if you just invert the numbers, it'll happen on the other side. So that's where you're going to get 624 at the end. However, it's cool that, and it's another one of these functions that numbers have because of the decimal system that generate these kind of mirrored numbers. There's lots of mirroring that goes on. So I believe Matt's been looking into this too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really interested in metrology, and it looks like the way the world has been divided with different units divides down into triple-digit numbers. So I think Dane's talked about 111 before when you divide the circumference of the world into 360 degrees in kilometers. That's 111 times 360. Let's just check that. Let's see if I'm right. Yeah, so that's 39,960 kilometers. So
Right.
You see something similar in miles, but we're not dividing by 360 anymore. We're dividing by 28. And there's a load of research that's been going on that really started with somebody back in the 1960s, Livio Staccini. And he noticed that a load of ancient sites were at sevenths between the equator and the North Pole. And then you get the likes of John Michell, who discovers Avebury is exactly 4/7 of the way from the equator to the North Pole. And then you get places like the Karnak Temple Complex, the largest temple complex in Egypt. That's at 2/7. Bimini Roads at 2/7. Cahokia Mound, the largest mound in North America, is at 3/7. The place that I think is probably a good candidate for Atlantis at 3/7. Delphi, 3/7. And there's a couple of other places I've discovered at 4/7 as well. And when you look into that, if that's a seventh from the equator to the North Pole, we have to multiply that by 4 to get the entire circumference, which is 28. So if you say the diameter of the world is 7,920 miles, you have to times that by pi to get the circumference, which is 24,881, something like that. And when you divide it by 28, you get 888 miles. So it's this system of triple digit numbers that people seem to have been using in conjunction with these Earth measurements.
What are you using for pi? Are you using 22/7 or?
Yeah, 22/7.
Yeah.
And I
heard the other day that actually each of the rings, those circumference rings, as you go up towards the pole, is using a slightly different version of pi each time. Have you heard about that?
I've not heard about that, but I have noticed that the Delphi latitude, which is 3/7, that is where the chord of the circle is equal to the quarter circumference in length, which is quite interesting because that chord is then 7. So you can then divide that by 7 and times it by 22 to work out the actual circumference of that ring of latitude. So it's 888 miles times 22 at the Delphi latitude is the circumference.
It occurs to me that there's an omphalos stone at Delphi. Are you finding similar? Everybody out there, an omphalos stone is like this weird beehive-looking structure covered in, well, opium poppies in this case, but it's kind of a navel of the world idea. It's this foundation stone of certain dimensions, and any other structures that you put around it, as long as they are measured to the metrics of those dimensions, that they will repeat, and it's like the center, and then everything else will fractally be in proportion around it as you build the building. And also it's a navel of the world. Sorry, Matt.
I was going to say that's definitely a thing, and that's one of the things that Livio Stachini predicted. And this was obviously long before Google Earth existed. And now that we have Google Earth, you can line up some of these omphalos sites. So you've got Delphi on a ley line, and you follow that ley line, and it takes you to Avebury. And there used to be a sort of egg-shaped stone in the southern smaller circle at Avebury, which is an omphalos. Yes, yeah. I'll try and dig a picture of that out somewhere. Somebody has drawn a model of what Avebury would have looked like when everything was there. And I think that went missing a couple of 100 years ago. It might be worth looking into.
Yeah, definitely.
And then that aligns with that same ley line goes to the Tuaro stone in Ireland, and even sort of mainstream archaeology is saying this Tuaro stone seems out of place. It looks like it should really belong in France. It doesn't really belong in Ireland, and that's on that same ley line. And
why would you say that? Because of the makeup of the stone, or because it's got French writing on it?
I believe it's the sort of carvings that are on it. The sort of the patterns that are carved into it don't look like anything in Ireland. There's only 2 other stones in Ireland that look like the Tuaro stone, and they have got similar carvings. And I think all 3 of those stones are sort of considered out of place. Like they think possibly people came over from France and carved those a couple of thousand years ago. But all of those sites, they terminate at Mecca. So that's the most interesting thing for me. And Mecca is within the tropics. So what I think is going on.
What do you mean by terminate at Mecca? Could you?
So the idea that I've got with regards to ley lines being cast is that you wait for a certain time of the year at high noon. So there'll be 2 days per year where you can do this. And the sun will be at zenith over a site in the tropics. In this case, for these omphalos alignments, you have to wait for the sun to be directly above Mecca, and then it casts a shadow, and you can use that to draw straight lines. So you also need to use it in conjunction with a sundial because you can use a sundial to work out longitude. But there's more to it than that. You have to have actually worked things out with the moon earlier on. There's lots and lots of work involved in this. But once you work out where your relative longitude is, you can use, do a measurement on a certain time of a day to create a ley line at a certain time of year. So at high noon, you'll cast these shadows, and basically you can actually work out the distance between where you are and where Mecca is on this particular day of the year, because the relative angle of the sun, wherever you're standing, as long as you're within 90 degrees, a quarter of, the world's circumference away from Mecca, you'll actually be able to find out how far away you are. So the idea I'm saying that why it terminates in Mecca is because that's the end site, that's the last site on the ley line, and it happens to be within the tropics, and you can only have these zenith nodes in the tropics.
Right, because of calculation.
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
And it is what's really interesting to me. I'm finding these zenith nodes around the world, and they're not only in the tropics, but they are at or below 22.1 degrees, which is where the tropics is at its lowest point over its 41,000 year cycle. The tropics move between 22.1 and 24.5 degrees. So it looks to me like either this happened at a certain date, or they knew about these cycles and thought these sites, if we want them to be useful long into the future, we have to build them below this latitude. Otherwise, they'll be useless for most of time.
In your head, who is we? Me and Dane have said the gingers, but that's about as far as we've gone.
Well, this is really, really quite out there. I think it's definitely our ancestors, but I think there's a very heavy Denisovan influence on this. And the reason I say this is because there is a grid of 56ths east to west, where there's a bunch of sites in like the ancient Near East and Kazakhstan and Russia. And these sites are precisely east to west, separated by 1/56th of the Earth's circumference. So we'll get into the 56 in a minute. But the easternmost point on that 56 grid is Denisova Cave. So, and Denisova Cave is the easternmost site on my sort of grid of places at sevenths, and it's at the 4/7 latitude. So Denisova Cave is at the same latitude as Avebury. It's at the same latitude as as Lake Manicouagan. And Lake Manicouagan is very important to my research because it's basically the largest ring-shaped structure on the planet that's visible to the eye, and it seems to be.
Where's that? Sorry.
So Lake Manicouagan is in northeastern Canada, and it's a meteorite impact, and it's about 200 million years old.
Right.
And it's 4/7 from the equator to the North Pole, just like Avebury. And it just happens, as fate would have it, the largest ring-shaped structure in the world is exactly 1 radian to the west of the second largest ring-shaped structure in the world, which is the Rickard structure.
Right.
Okay, so it looks like somebody's spotted this natural phenomenon where the 2 largest rings on the planet are separated east to west by exactly 1 radian, and built other sites at radians further east to actually create a system of anchor points where you reference these specific longitudes to then work out the placement of your other sites. So 1 radian to the east of the Rickard structure, you have the ziggurat of Ur. And then 1 radian to the east of that is Angkor Wat. So you have these 4 particular sites that are set out at radians east to west. And each one of these seems to be a reference point for a different grid. So this Denisova Cave grid related to the ziggurat of Ur, for example. So Tiwanaku, I know I'm going off on a bit of a tangent now, but Tiwanaku is at the exact same, it's on this primary meridian of Lake Manicouagan, is what I'm saying. So the gateway of the sun, so this is within the tropics. The gateway of the sun is on exactly the same longitude as Lake Manicouagan. And not only that, but it's equidistant between Lake Manicouagan and the Rickard structure. So it's 67.5 degrees arc distance from each of these sites, which is 3/16 of the world's circumference. And at the gateway of the sun at Tiwanaku, you see this sort of god figure at the center of this sort of relief carving, and he's holding 2 different staffs in his hands, and it looks like these people are kneeling in front of this godlike figure. But you could interpret it, because they're looking through their staffs, that he could be teaching them how to measure the earth using things like spears and sticks and atlatls. And it's 3 rows of 16 people that are kneeling before him, and it happens to be that this site is 3/16 from Lake Manicouagan and the Rickard structure. And it's, these sites seem to be setting out some sort of radian system, as far as I can tell.
Do you think that the point in the sites is to kind of teach the system, or do you think are you on, because they're all ley lines and stuff like that, aren't they? So are you on the energy thing? What in your head? I know it's almost impossible to really tell, But in your head, what is the reason they're building these structures?
Well, I'm adamant that they were aligned using the sun and they were set out using the sun. That doesn't mean that's what they were only for. I mean, I suspect they were trying to be used as some sort of ancient GPS system, for effectively hunter-gatherers who didn't have, satellites like we have today. And they were trying to set out these key sites that you could go around the world to different places and you could find your way around using very basic tools like spears and sundials. And you could make a sundial and a moon dial that's just a disc that goes over the tip of your spear. So it wouldn't be very difficult to manufacture these things. That's not to say that there couldn't be more to this. I mean, I've spoken to somebody about this recently, and he suggested, could there be some sort of emergent phenomenon where these nodes were being set out, and they find out later on that something is happening, whether that's synchronicities or there's some sort of, energy grid within these ley lines. I couldn't possibly comment on that. That's way outside of my expertise, but I'm definitely open to those kinds of ideas. But at first, sorry,
It does
carry
seem
on.
to be something like that. That it's a multitude of things, kind of. It seems like it's a whole system compressed. But I can't help but think. Obviously, it's outside my remit as well. But I can't help but think there's energy involved somehow. At least like the feeling of energy, or a better feeling, or something like that. Because these are all holy sites, and there are temples on most of them, and similar things.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to Howard Crowhurst, for example, he's a massive influence in this entire sphere, especially on myself. And I went to one of his talks, and he said that he thinks people were able to navigate, and they would kind of know where they were by feeling. And that's quite an interesting, concept. I mean, I used to do, I used to hand build machinery years ago, and I was a lot more practical back then than I am now. And I got to a point where I could just drill holes without measuring them. I could get them, within half a millimeter apart. I couldn't do that anymore. I think sometimes you kind of get like an intuition when you've been doing something for long enough. Whether these things helped or not, I don't know. It'd be wrong to rule it out. I certainly think there's research being done that you can send certain types of waves and communications through the earth. They're sort of more fringe ideas, but they're definitely worth exploring. And alternatively, there's always been this idea of some sort of Gaia sort of earth goddess, and it's within recent years we've started to discover how important things like the sort of the fungi in the earth is, and it can communicate possibly over very large distances. Who's to say this can't happen across the ocean? The ocean's full of plankton and other things, and it could be that the straight line is the shortest way to communicate from A to B. Or it could be something more subtle. It could be something more, it's something that we don't understand. But I think there could.
Sorry, go on, mate.
I think there could be more to it. There might be a reason why these sites are so venerated. If it was just for navigation, you wouldn't need to build gigantic temples at these places.
No, you'd maybe want to build a high structure so you could see it from a distance away. But
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah, and often in these places there are quite large populaces as well. So it's weird. What do you think of this, Dane? What's your inclination on it?
Yeah, I'm thinking these like music notes, like the length of a wave, and we're measuring it in meters and everything. So I'm thinking, even with the guys from Megalithomania, where they talk about when you stand in a certain spot at Stonehenge or any of these places, and it's the way that the sound comes back to you, and I'd say certain frequencies, certain notes would be more resonant than others in certain size circles, or they'd be tuned, I reckon, to a certain note. So I'm just that meters per second, that waves. I'm just thinking that even you put a stone here, you put a stone over here, you're going to have this interaction.
Resonance. Yeah.
But in the beginning was the word. So I'm just I'm coming always back to the way that even our ears work, how sound propagates through the air, and that even back to Ken Wheeler when he says that it's just the air itself has been disturbed, to put it simply, and so it's just the disturbance that our ears are designed to pick up. So it's in, what does he call it? The perturbations. I can never remember.
Perturbations, yeah, wave perturbations.
Yeah, so that's it's just all these disturbances that we are attuned with our equipment to pick up on.
Mm.
So I'm thinking that these distances and musical notes they're just totally intertwined. That's what they are. They're kind of the same thing. That's why
Yeah,
I think the
there's no doubt that the basis of all this is some kind of mix between metrology and music.
yeah,
All the harmonic numbers and you know the whole thing's musical. The fact that you just said most of the sites are all very acoustically attuned. I mean, they're going to be if they're made to all these harmonic numbers, but
yeah,
yeah, they're doing it on purpose, and you can see it. I mean, even the zodiac in astrology, one of the main things that they're measuring things by, that's all musical. It's 3 and 4 and 12 with 7 in
yeah,
there as well. It's all musical.
yeah,
Yeah. Have you picked up on much of the musical stuff, Matt?
No, I mean I've read other people's ideas. I mean, I'm trying to think of the name now. There's a book called Atlantis, Egyptian Genesis, where it's a book about the commonalities between creation stories from one part of the world to the other. Everyone has a sort of common creation myth to some level,
Yeah.
and then the sort of conclusion in that is that there's perhaps you know the idea behind Atlantis was something more musical or linked to music in some way or another. But I'd have to go back over that again. But it's not something I've been focusing on at the moment. But I've noticed a lot of people moving towards it, and I'd say at a minimum, there's if it's not related to music, there's certain key patterns that you see in the universe and harmonics from one medium to another. That they're the same. You get
Yeah.
harmonics in the way the planets fall. You get harmonics in the way sound is propagated. That when you measure emissions in electronics, you have to make sure you're not creating harmonics that can cause high frequency disturbances. It's a universal system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when I looked into the Atlantis kind of, it's not so much creation myth, is it? It's more like an end of things myth. But there's a creation thing in there at the beginning. When I did the gematria and did the translations on the names of the people that live there, and I'm quite boned up on the Pythagorean stuff. It clearly is Pythagorean harmonics they're talking about, plus quite a lot of the Dionysian Orphic cult stuff. There's quite a few hints at drugs and stuff like that in there. But it is clearly a Pythagorean creation story. And because of that, music.
yeah.
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 Cool. So could you quickly, so that I understand, and maybe I don't know how much Dane knows about this, but we talked about it briefly before. Can you explain to us radians without going into the actual megalithic stuff? Just because I'm an idiot, I don't understand the radians thing.
Okay. I mean, there's this idea that all methods that are used to divide a circle are somewhat arbitrary. I disagree with this. I don't think they are completely arbitrary, but you can divide a circle into 360 degrees. That's been in use for thousands of years. Before that, people were dividing circles into 60 instead of 360, and you can divide a circle into any number of segments that you so choose. The idea behind the radian is that you can actually measure a segment in a universal format where in the sort of arc length of the segment is equal to the radius of the circle.
Arc length, sorry.
So
I'm just trying to keep it simple for everybody and for me.
so basically, if you take the radius of a circle and lay it around the circumference, so you curve it onto the circumference, that's the radian. And the idea behind that is that it's a self-referencing measurement. So
Right.
it's basically the radian is 2 pi basically. So there's
I get you.
yeah.
So it's like a segment of a pie essentially, and
Yes.
the small section of the circumference at the edge is that measure.
Yes, yeah. So
Mm.
yeah, because obviously if you use the diameter, you can fit it around 3.14 times, but the radius is half the amount, so it's 6.28 radians in a circle. So it's a universal measurement. And I guess the idea is if you're trying to build something and you're worried about knowledge being lost, if you do things in radians, people can rediscover what you've done.
Right. Yeah, and that's important for this secret science, because it is one system, and I'm imagining no one's got any books or anything like that. So you need to be able to memorize this stuff, or at least it needs to be self-referencing enough that you can re-extract it, which is one of the reasons why we are now able to do this work and pull it out again.
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time at the moment. I think there's lots of different people that have got different ideas, and I think they're all really starting to come together. Really, in the last sort of 6 to 18 months, people's ideas are really starting to mesh now.
Yeah.
And I think, we've all got a different piece of the puzzle here. There's also some interesting things for me, because some of my research, and I think Dane's in the same place as me, is suggesting that there are people that might well know all of this already, and it might not be lost. It might be being hidden.
Yeah, I think so, that the guy, that Japanese fella who did the pyramid outside the Louvre, he seems to know a lot. I forget his name, but he did that glass pyramid. I don't think there are many though, and they do seem to be linked to the Masons, frankly.
Well, that guy was Chinese.
Was he?
And I think there's a particular site in Shanghai that is set up to be a major node on a ley line network, and it goes through a bunch of different sites. You see this. So you talk about the Louvre. You've got the two pyramids at the Louvre, because most people think it's one, but there's a second pyramid next to it, which is inverted. It goes upside down underground, and you see that when you go, into the Louvre itself. So I'm planning on going later this year at some point.
Oh, cool.
But what's the symbology behind that in itself is quite interesting, because it sort of links into the underworld, and it links into as above, so below. But for me, what's really interesting is that it fits onto another system. I found a bunch of sites that are in intervals of 500 nautical miles away from the site I'm claiming is Atlantis. So you get these places that are 1,000 nautical miles away from Atlantis, 1,500, 3,000, 2,500, etc., etc. And I'll send you a map later so you can sort of put it up on the screen when you release this. But the Louvre pyramids are 1,500 nautical miles away from what I'm calling Atlantis. And the Giza pyramids are exactly 3,000 nautical miles away, which is twice the distance. And the Giza pyramids can create a solar alignment on the summer solstice sunset. And the ones at the Louvre, they actually align with a mound called the Crack Mound in, I think it's in Poland. It's got a very sort of Delphi sort of origin story to it, and that long alignment occurs on the equinoxes, and that creates the same alignment to the center point of Atlantis. And even the sort of oldest pyramids in the Americas, they're on this 500 nautical mile system. The Carol pyramids in South America and Peru, they were built at exactly the same time as the Giza pyramids. They're, at intervals of 500 nautical miles away. I think 4,000.
Before I ask you for your location of Atlantis, what do you think they're at that distance because it's close enough together, or is there something in particular?
I don't know why 500. I'm of the opinion, this isn't my opinion. I was looking into the origins of nautical miles, and I wish I could remember the guy's name. This guy wrote a book in the 80s, and he was saying the nautical mile is another Earth measurement. So, and it's derived from the stadion, really, originally. And the stadion is 185 meters, and the nautical mile is exactly 10 times that. So,
okay, I actually discovered something about this the other day. So, the nautical mile, what the Earth is 2160 nautical miles, isn't it? That's pretty sure it's
21,600. Yeah.
Yeah, I always say 2160 just because it's one of those numbers, but yeah, 21,600. So I realized the actual divisions of it was like 20. Let me do the calculation quickly. 12,960 was it? Oh no, it's sorry, other way around. Obviously, I'm pausing the video at this point. Times 2 equals. Oh, I think I might be getting it wrong. It was either 51,840 or 12,960. Did those ring a bell? There were so many divisions around the Earth, basically, and I was like, I kind of recognized the amount of divisions, the striations down the planet, and it was twice the precessional year, or half of. I can't remember which way around it was without looking at my notes. I was like, whoa, there's a thing, because there's more as above, so below. I see them referencing precession so much as like a base way of understanding all these harmonic things.
Yeah.
That they turn into it as often as they can to have that self-referencing thing. Do you know anything about this, Dane?
No, not really. But the self-referencing thing is, I think that's the really key thing. Like when we talk about 9 and how 9 always adds back to 9 and all that sort of fundamental stuff. I noticed the other day with 144, I did just the sum, and it was 16. Sorry, I squared everything. Squared. Oh, that's right. And I also did just do plus, and it comes back to 144. Right, so it's the only one out of the whole harmonic series that actually self-references itself. All the others, like 864 and all that, don't do it. Like you add them together, then you times them together, and then you just times those two answers together, and you get like different harmonics in the scale, but you don't get back to the original number. But 144 does. And I was like, wow, that's that self-referencing type of, yeah. It's why I probably think why it's important.
And like 144 is in so many religious texts, and there we go again. I keep coming back to the same thing, that all the religions have this in there. They all seem to be referencing kind of this holy city, New Jerusalem idea that what's his name was getting on about. John Michel was so invested in. Obviously, that's in Plato and it's in the Bible. There are so many of these heavenly cities that they're using as a reference.
Yeah.
And that 144 is probably even more so than 108. Like it's ubiquitous in the religious texts.
Yeah, in Samaria, it was the D was the Mies of the scale, music scale. D was the central thing. So, yeah, we're going back as far as we can go with language, I suppose, written language, but it seems to be, yeah. I mean, even with Matt saying before, with that asteroid strike or meteor, that perfect circle. Where'd you say that was?
Canada.
That's Northeast Canada, yeah.
I'm wondering even were things like that noticed, and then even notice the distances apart from that one to the other one, and that these are natural things, but yet they're still playing out to these ratios, or it's like that mountain in Moria. I look at it and think, wow, it looks like the top of it's been added. Maybe it was originally, but I don't know. It might be a natural thing in the landscape that they found it. Yeah,
well, sometimes as I've pretty much finished my book, by the way, Dane. But as I got to the end of it and I came to some like conclusions, it got a bit mundane to me. It's like suddenly all these things, oh yeah, it's the measures and it's prehistoric measurements and all the other conclusions I came to.
Yeah.
But then like you turn around and it is the size of the moon and the size of the sun, and there's a mounting exactly where this coordinate is, or there's some part of this puzzle fundamentally that isn't human in inverted commas, and it's just I can't quite get my head around it.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Matt?
Yeah.
Do you know much about procedural generation? Like, sort of, it's a video game term.
Yeah.
So, for obviously people listening might not know what we're talking about, but the idea behind procedural generation is you create like a whole sort of system from a very small amount of code, so it follows a basic set of rules, and this procedural code can generate a whole universe, for example, or Minecraft, it generates a sort of a whole new level based on a key number. And the idea behind procedural generation is that you can create very large landscapes, planets, and universes using a very small amount of code. And there were video games around in the 80s and 90s where you had the whole galaxy on a floppy disk because it was
Elites and games like that.
Yeah,
Worms was another one a bit later.
It was, yeah. But I'm wondering, perhaps reality can't be too complicated, and there's like a ultimate set of rules behind reality itself, and this is why we see these patterns everywhere. Because
wow, I love that, mate. That is fun. I mean, I think we've all been getting at the fact that there's these numbers that build everything, these principles, but to call it procedurally generated, that's very insightful, mate. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we're in a computer simulation, but reality, I guess it can't be too complicated. Otherwise, it would just be chaos. It would be complete chaos. And we look at everything in terms of we see the macro and the micro, and then we start to look at things like atoms, then quarks, and we don't know how far down that goes. But perhaps all of reality, regardless of the scale that we're looking at, complies with these set of rules.
Well, look, the fact that these megalithic measurements are based on the human body, the palm, the foot, the inch being the thumb, and of course they are more standardized than that. And we've all got different sized shapes. But then if you then extend that foot, which is an archetypal human foot, and it just so happens to generate the harmonic numbers, there's man is the measure of all things kind of a thing going on. It just keeps opening your mind, this stuff. And you've got to wonder, are these prehistoric fellas, you do trace it, I think pretty much everybody into this traces it way back into prehistory. Did they know something that we've forgotten, or were they as bamboozled by it as we are, but they've cottoned on to how the maths and things like this work?
I mean, I kind of, well, if we go back to when I think this all goes back, originates, I think maybe not all of them, but I think that the placement of ancient sites began in the Eemian, which was the previous interglacial. So we're in a warm period now, which, these warm periods last anywhere from like 5,000 years to about 15,000 years. And they only come around every 120, 130,000 years or so. And then we could dive straight back into an ice age. Lake Manicouagan is so pivotal. It's like the keystone in my sort of radian network.
Right.
If this is the ultimate reference point, with regards to how everything was placed, it all had to be done when Lake Manicouagan was ice-free, because for most of the last 2.58 million years, it's been covered in ice. So if it's being used as a reference point, and it's covered in ice, it is useless, which might be one of the reasons why Tiwanaku was built, because it's always ice-free and it's at the same longitude. Same longitude, yeah. And,
so what do you think's there? Do you think is there still ice there now?
No, it's ice free. It's been ice free for I guess probably for the best part of the last 10,000 years. I would have thought.
Yeah. So do you think there might be a structure there, or is it just like a sacred body of water or something like that?
So, in my opinion, I think all of this started with a mound building culture, which I think might have been the Denisovans. And there's two reasons why I think it goes to 130,000 years ago. The first being that it has to have been ice-free, and in my opinion, this all started before the last ice age ended, because the placement of some of these sites and the stories, and Göbekli Tepe, for example, which is linked by a bunch of ley lines to different places. It must have happened the previous time it was ice-free, and that was the Eemian. And the second reason is the field of phylogenetics. So this is a legitimate academic field of research where they sort of trace back language and genetic interactions between populations. And the sort of I believe it's the consensus view in phylogenetics that the origin story that all of our world religions come from dates back to the Eemian 130,000 years ago. And there's been peoples that have been separated for tens of thousands of years, and they've got common creation stories. So that's why
How
I
long
think
ago was the Eemian period?
130,000 years ago.
Right.
So it's a long time. It's way out there. I know people like Robert Schoch are saying things might go back 20, 30, 40,000 years. I'm saying perhaps the origins of this are actually much older. I
mean, this is around a time where there were actually distinct species of humans. You would have had Cro-Magnons, Denisovians, Homo sapiens.
Yeah, that's right. Neanderthals, all of that. And it's the Denisovans intrigue me the most because when they were around and we were around, they were the technologically superior species. They discovered drilling before we did, or like bow drilling, or well, we don't know it's bow drilling. It's probably bow drilling, maybe pump drills, some sort of man-powered drilling. So they you see that Denisovan bracelet that predates anything that we drilled as a species by tens of thousands of years. Populations with the largest amount of Denisovan DNA that exists today were using ground stone tools, which you don't see in places like Europe and the Americas until the Neolithic. Ground stone tools are more associated with the Neolithic than the Mesolithic or Paleolithic. And if you look at the Aboriginal Australians who've got quite a large percentage of Denisovan DNA, when they arrived in Australia something like 50,000 years ago, they already had ground stone tools like 40,000 years before the rest of the world was doing it.
And they have similar creation myths and similar mythologies that they clearly. Right. So what do you think? So I don't know what Dane thinks about this, but the reason why we jokingly say the gingers, meaning like Cro-Magnon, kind of a more pure Cro-Magnon, is that we do tend to find, I mean, post Younger Dryas, is gingers buried at these places. Like locally, you seem to get, Cro-Magnon looking ginger folk. What's your thoughts about that?
I don't know where these ginger genes originated and if there's more than one origin to them. I mean, I've definitely heard theories about Neanderthals possibly having like ginger hair and blue eyes. It could be the same with Denisovans. It could just be a purely latitude-related phenomenon. And it could be that people with these ginger genes inherited them from these our sort of cousin species. So,
like really primitive people. Come on, Dan, you must have something to say on this, mate, as a fellow ginge. More of a ginger than me.
Yeah, I've got no idea with the ginger thing really about where they came from. It does seem latitude based though, like north. It just seems, where the sun doesn't shine.
Yeah,
Because,
where it's cold.
We make a lot of vitamin D. We don't even have to be in the sun. We've been in the cave for years, redheads in particular with blue eyes. Because there's more redheads with brown eyes than there are with blue.
With blue, yeah.
It's the most rare, even green eyes as well with red hair, the combo. But 0.17% of the planet today.
What are you? Are you blue, green, or brown?
Blue and red hair, yeah.
All right. So ultra rare.
0.
We should prize you, mate. We should prize you, treasure you.
Hey?
We should prize and treasure you. You're not allowed outside anymore. You might get burned or something. Just stay indoors from now on.
That's right. Well, I mean, in Australia, forget it. I'm just a walking thing.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So go on, mate. No, you carry on.
No, you go. I'll say nothing.
Mine was like, okay, I think the time has come. Where's Atlantis, Matt?
Yeah.
So I think it's at 38 degrees, 32 minutes, 6 seconds north, 29 degrees, 24 minutes, 9 seconds west. So that's
that.
Yeah, that's right at the center of the Azores Plateau. So
all right, okay.
Yeah, the Azores Plateau is a sort of chunk of continental type crust that's now close to 2 kilometers underwater. And the peaks of the mountains are the present day islands. There's like, a few islands out in the Azores, and those are actually just the tops of gigantic mountains.
Mm.
And
Yeah, you can see them on the scans on the various maps. They're really quite chunky, aren't they? And they look small because of the ocean around it, but there's a fair chunk of land there.
well, it's really interesting because I was watching a Randall Carlson podcast, and he was saying that he thinks Atlantis would be in the Azores. And I just kind of thought to myself, well, this place was so big, surely you could see it on a bathymetric map. So I called up some bathymetric maps, and there was something that was circular at the center of the Azores Plateau. And when I measured it, it was the same size as Atlantis if we use the stadia being 185 meters. And it's exactly the same size. There's like an outer canal, a second canal. The resolution isn't there to see an inner canal, but it's all very low resolution. But there's something circular there. It's definitely based on something natural, because I've looked at a gravity map that my friend sent me, and the gravity there is ever so slightly higher. You couldn't feel it, but it suggests that the rock at that site is denser than the surrounding plateau that it sits on underwater. So it's on a flat plateau surrounded by mountains.
So what would that suggest?
I think it's possibly like a basalt plug or something like that, the remains of some sort of volcano. I don't think there's any other reasonable explanation for why the gravity is that much higher. It's only a little bit higher, but it suggests that the rock there is significantly denser than the surrounding area, because it doesn't really sit elevated to the surrounding plateau. So you'd expect the gravity to be higher if it was a gigantic hill or a mountain, or if it's made out of a denser rock, basically. So it's
and it was said to be mountainous, Atlantis.
Yeah, I mean, the Azores Plateau is probably one of the biggest mountain ranges in the world. It's just underwater.
Interesting. I must say, from my personal view, and I haven't looked on the Earth. I obviously drinking a lot of people's ideas about this. When I read Plato's Atlantis, and went into the language of it, and went into the kind of occulted language of it as well. Obviously, the king of Atlantis was a chap called Atlas. Atlas was the word that Pythagoras used for the number 10 in his Tetractys.
Okay.
For everybody out there, Tetractys is like snooker balls, basically. There's one at the top and 4 at the bottom, and it's a map of the cosmos for him, and also a way of teaching his number philosophy and showing some weird things about maths, these harmonics. So, Atlas was the word he used for the number 10, which was really important to him. It was also, obviously, it's the name of the god that holds up the heavens, Atlas. We see him on maps, but he doesn't really hold the world. He holds up the heavens. And when Hercules is trying to go and scrump the golden apples from the garden of the Hesperides, he has to kind of do some trickery with Atlas. They're his daughters. The Hesperides are his daughters. And he's like, there's some trickery goes on, there's some swapping that goes on, and then Hercules tricks him to hold up the world again. But in another story, he carves 2 pillars to hold up the world. Now,
Okay.
Atlas is one of the words that they used for the axis mundi, the pole of the Earth, the North Pole. So he's carved these 2 poles out, these 2 atlases, and put them there. Now, there are 2 poles. There's the pole of the ecliptic and the pole of the axis mundi, the Earth itself. The ecliptic's where the planets spin around. So for me, whatever I read in Plato's Atlantis always pointed me up. I'm not saying there's not a down as well, as above, so below. But for me, it all made absolute perfect sense when I realized Atlas was the poles, and then you look up, and there are 3 bands of stars, essentially, if you're in the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
You've got the circumpolar stars, and you've got a few others, another ring of stars, and then you've got the ring of the zodiac.
Zodiac, yeah.
So those are your 3 bands. Obviously, there's lots of other features, I've got a video. If anyone's interested in my view on this, there are a couple of videos on my channel. If you look for them, one of them called "Was Plato on Shrooms?" I didn't name that. It was it was the boys at the Amish Inquisition. We should get you on the Amish, actually, seeing as you're an English fella.
I've been on there.
Drop
I've
them
been on there
line.
a couple of times already.
Oh, have you, mate? Oh, that might be where I've seen you before then. Because I was like, oh, no, I know this guy from somewhere. Have you talked about Atlantis on there?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Cool.
this site that I'm saying is a good candidate for Atlantis. It's the center line is exactly 18 degrees west of the center line of the Ricat structure, and there's other places on this 18-degree grid system. And when I say exactly, I mean it's exactly. It goes straight through the one, the center of one to the other. But more interestingly, it's at the Delphi latitude. It's 3/7 north of the equator. So that's also the Cahokia Mound latitude.
So just to divert a little bit, why do you think they're using sevens? Because seven's such an awkward number.
I think it's all to do with sort of interchangeability between like radians and pi and this sort of number system that seems to have been encoded into both Giza and Stonehenge, which are both actually geodetically linked. But at Giza, you see it's the circumference of the Great Pyramid, which I don't know who was the first person. It might have been Flinders Petrie that noticed it might actually be an analog scale model of the world, where it's 43,200 times smaller, and it's got a circumference of 1,760 Royal Egyptian cubits. And I think we can knock the zero off the end. I think it's the 176 that's important. I think the zero is there for scale. They wanted to make it massive, and if they just made it 176 Royal Egyptian cubits in circumference, it would have been tiny and pathetic. So,
Well, here's another thing as well for the harmonics. If you had a zero on the end, obviously, the more harmonic a number it is, the more other numbers it's divisible by.
yes.
If you had a zero on the end of things, it also becomes divisible by 10 and 5 automatically.
That's right.
Yeah.
But that 176 is really useful from a divisor point of view, because it's divisible at 1, 2, 4, 8, 11, 22, 44, 88. I think there's some other numbers in there. But that 176 is just 8 times 22, isn't it? So it's that 22 over 7 thing. And and really the pyramid is 8 sides. You can see it on the equinox. It's very subtle, but it has 8 sides, and it may be trying to point out that's the real number you're looking for, 22. But the problem with 22 over 7 is you can't get integers from it if you're trying to look at quarters of a circle, and then if you're trying to sort of represent it, on a global scale, you just don't have enough resolution. So what happens when you divide 176 by 2 pi? 2 pi is in a radian. If you do 176 divided by 2 pi, you get 28. And if you actually use 22 over 7, it actually gives you a perfect integer as well. So you've got this number system, and you see this reflected in Stonehenge. So we look at Stonehenge as it is today. That's not how it started. It was a very simple structure to begin with, but by the end of the Neolithic, it was just 56 posts in a circle, and the earthworks were there. The present day earthworks were built, and it was 56 posts. It looked nothing like the present day structure.
This is like just before the pyramids, isn't it?
It's at the very beginning of the first dynasty. So it's another key date you see around the world where things are being built. So Avebury, the precursor to Avebury is at this point. It's the cove stones at Avebury were placed at 3100 BC. Stonehenge is built. It's the first dynasty of the Egyptian, empire is 3100 BC. What we see as Stonehenge today is probably a Bronze Age structure built by the Beaker people. It's not actually the Neolithic structure, which was 56, probably timber posts, equidistant apart. So 56 is 2 times 28. And if you actually look at the circumference of the inner bank, so the innermost earthwork bank, the circumference is 560 Royal Egyptian cubits. So if you multiply 560 by pi, if you multiply it by 22/7, you get 1,760, which is the circumference of the Great Pyramid. And you might think, oh, yeah, that's a coincidence, but they are geodetically linked by a site in West Africa. So we've all heard of the modern religion voodoo. It's sort of like that religion that came to the Americas. So people were taken as slaves and they were trying to sort of cling on to their religion or their beliefs, and it sort of became a religion. But that comes from a West African religion called Vodun. And Vodun itself is a relatively new religion. In its formal form, it's maybe 500-600 years old, but its origins are about 8,000 years old. So that these figures and these creation stories go back a lot further than the religion of Vodun. The most sacred temple in the entire Vodun religion is in a town called Ouida in Benin, West Africa. And that is the zenith node that takes you through their most sacred shrines. There are shrines all over West Africa, but the most sacred shrine in Vodun is the Dankoli shrine. You can draw a line from their most sacred temple, the Python's temple, interestingly enough, through Dankoli shrine, through Stonehenge, through Avebury, and it takes you up to the Ring of Brodgar in Scotland, which is the 3rd largest henge in Britain. So you have Avebury. I can't remember the name. The other one, the 2nd largest, is in Somerset, and the 3rd largest is in Scotland on the I can't remember what you call them, the islands north of Scotland.
Scotland, right?
Yes,
the Ring of
Ring of Brodgar. So again, you might think that's a coincidence, but then Python's temple is 1/14th, which is from the equator to the North Pole, which is 1/56th of the entire circumference of the world, and is exactly 45.00 degrees to Avebury. So what it means is that when the sun is directly over the Python's temple, the shadow that is cast by the stick that you lay at, say, Stonehenge, if you had a gnome, a stick or a spear, the length of the shadow is the same as the length of the spear. It's because it's a 45-degree angle you're witnessing at Avebury. So, but it's like Stonehenge, southern. There's a gap in the southern most earthwork, and it's slightly offset from south. And I think it's slightly offset because it actually forms the alignment with this Python's temple in West Africa. And what's really, really interesting is the Python's temple, that sort of the creation story. When they talk about the earth, they say the earth is 7,000 coils of the serpent. That's what the earth is made out of. And at Avebury, Howard Crowhurst spotted that Silbury Hill is exactly 1/7,000th of the distance from the North Pole to the equator from the center of Avebury. So the center line through Avebury is 1/7,000th through the center line of Silbury Hill, which is the largest mound in Europe. So
you must get a lot of serpenty stuff in Australia, Dane.
Yeah.
I know your locals there. They love a bit of rainbow serpent worship and whatnot. Do you get lots of mounds attached to serpent lore?
Not really, no. There's not a lot. I mean, not that I've been found of. There's one near Congo here that I've actually taken some Aboriginal people to, and he actually said, "This doesn't look like ours." He said, "It looks like one of yours," and he was, the white fella. But he meant thousands of years ago because it's covered in forest and it's been there who knows how long. But yeah, he said it looks like a white fella mound. So And this area here with Maruya, you've got Mount Moriah, high place. That's what it means. It's a runner's threshing floor. We've gone through this before, but all these very strange things that the Aboriginals, even a word Araluen means water lily, and it's also a Islamic, ancient Islamic word for water lily. I'm like, well,
Hmm.
that's kind of uncanny that the Aboriginal word for water lily is the same as the Islamic one. And, who knows how long that goes back. But
Yeah.
Araluen is the word. I mean, that's kind of, and then right at the top end of Australia, they say that, yeah, like a Quetzalcoatl type of character turned up and told them about the serpent and the stuff that we hear about everywhere else too.
I mean,
So
it seems to be slightly different things in different places. Some guys, it's like fish dudes that are turning up, like Oannes and these kind of characters in Sumeria, and in other places, it's serpent. I think I understand that they're all obviously the serpent before its measurements and things like that. It's the life force itself, and then that like yin and yang, it's dual. The serpent's a dual animal. It's
Yeah.
medicine and poison. Looks like a willy, has a mouth like a vagina, all that stuff.
yeah,
But I think the reason why it feeds into the metrology is because, as you were just saying, that the coils, it's so many coils of the serpent that actually when you see a serpent coiling onto itself, that's the life force. Think of number being its vertebrae or the patterns on its back. And as these kind of intertwine with each other, then we get geometry in the world and things like that. So I think that's why it's so ubiquitous, and that this is the serpent knowledge.
Well, I think it's really interesting that all throughout the old world, when I say that, I mean parts of sort of North Africa, Middle East, Near East, especially Europe, this serpent becomes demonized, or that the sort of the idea behind the serpent gets demonized. And you look at these old religions, and often this serpent or serpent type figure is another part of the pantheon. And
Yeah, it's like a titan.
exactly, yeah. And I mean, you even this place I talked about earlier in Krakow, Poland, the Krak Mound. It's another one of these places where it fits into this system of the serpent being slayed. So this mound in Poland, no one knows how old it is. The story behind it was found by King Crackus, and he slew the serpent at the Krak Mound, who was like this sort of earth guardian figure that you see at Delphi. And it's the same thing over and over again. And even in Egypt, I think they started to demonize in the Bronze Age this sort of serpent type figure. And I think that's really the Bronze Age is when all of this stuff started to be hidden, in my opinion. And we're kind of in today. We're still living in this kind of Bronze Age top-down hierarchy where it's kind of like this shadow aspect of masculinity. It's like this warped aspect of do as I say, not that not as I do. And
What?
It's not about leading by example. It's about following this sort of psychopathic type figure, and it feels like that is the story of the last 6,000 years, really.
Years, yeah. Well, I will say, if you look back to Sumeria, and obviously the first epics that we have, things like Marduk and Tiamat having a fight, and think of George and the Dragon when I say this. Marduk destroys Tiamat by blowing an evil wind in its mouth, which is something to do with the four directions. The four compass directions is the south wind. It was a hot wind in those parts of the world. So he puts the evil wind in its mouth, inflates it up, and then he stabs it in its mouth. It goes through its stomach and through its heart. Now, George and the Dragon, he also stabs that serpent in its mouth. I don't think it's to do with the metrology. If it is, I can't figure this bit out. It's more to do with the fact that you got the life force, this dual serpent idea. It ends up in the body. Well, when it's in the body, it's things like the endocrine system and things like that. It's your animal urges and your animal drives. So you debilitate that by stabbing it in the mouth to kill the appetites.
Okay.
You got an appetite for sex, you got an appetite for food, all these vices. So I think that's why it's somewhat demonized. It's an idea of you you could say like you could catch the dragon and ride the dragon, or as they saw it, you kill the dragon, chop it up, and make the world from it. That you can, with this extra energy that you've got that's not going into vices, you
Yeah.
can then put into all these magical, wonderful things. Then you've got to start looking at yoga and qigong and stuff like that. And it must surely reference again these temples that are being built on these ley lines and grid references, that there is this serpent energy that people at least believed that they could accrue more of and put into better things. So I think that's why the serpent's the Gnostic god, isn't it? It's sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad. How do you play this game?
Yeah.
Is how it is.
Well, yeah, I agree. I can't remember the author's name, but she wrote a book about this idea of dualism being a more important thing to our pre-Bronze Age ancestors, and that we wouldn't have had traditional patriarchy that we see today. Men and women would have had clear roles in prehistory, but not in the way that we see today. And today, the idea with I think there's quite a warped sort of idea with a lot of modern feminism that the way to succeed is to copy this shadow aspect of masculinity and just be this sort of authoritarian type figure.
Bastard.
Yeah.
Well, you see a lot of women that engage with this kind of stuff. They think being masculine's the way, but that's they literally go that toxic masculine that they keep complaining about, and they've got no self-control. It's just pure aggression. So yeah, I agree. But anyway, we're not here to psychologize too much. We're here to understand what the fuck these guys were doing.
Yeah, I mean, if we sort of go back to Denisovans for a minute, something that intrigues me, apart from this one jawbone that was found off the coast of Taiwan, all of the remains of the Denisovans have been found in the mountains, and that there are people today that have inherited Denisovan genes that allow them to live in high altitudes, and it makes me wonder.
Where are we referencing?
I think like more in like the Himalayas, for example. But it's interesting because the gods always seem to live in the mountains or above the clouds somewhere.
Yeah.
And
I think that's also the hierarchy. To go back to psychology, I think that's your hierarchy as well. That because of that life force, some people have more, some people have less of whatever it is, and it creates a hierarchy.
But I think Andrew Collins had some really good ideas, because he released an article not long ago where he was saying that there are two genes that are very strongly linked to autism in modern day people that actually have come from Denisovans. Right. And maybe perhaps they were a bit like us. I mean, we don't have the skulls to prove it, but they're pretty sure they had bigger brains than us, possibly up to by about 50%. And if they had this sort of almost savant-like quality, maybe these calculations that we find fairly difficult to do today, they could have done them perhaps in their head, or visualized them in a much easier way than we can. And this stuff that we're like, oh, what's going on? To them, it might have just been second nature.
I will say, as I've spoke to Dane about this, I think the way we count with the Arabic Hindu numbers, it's slightly removed because we're using symbols, whereas they would have had, a lot of them would have been counting with pebbles and things like that. So they've got these patterns in front of them, whereas we don't. And those, if you aren't doing complex maths and you're just playing about with it and it's part of your culture, these numbers quickly arise. Look, even if you just get a calculator and you start doing calculations, you'll see 216 and 108 and 54, and these numbers pop up over and over again. So, yeah, I tend to, I love that idea. I also think that just by having a different format of mathematics, a different way of doing it, these things pop up anyway.
Well, have you seen the chimp experiment with arithmetic? It's just adding and subtracting. Basically, chimps have been taught to add up and subtract numbers, and the numbers are represented as dots, like you say. And the idea is that chimps are actually faster than us at arithmetic. They can do addition and subtraction faster, but maybe it's like you say, maybe it's the system they're using. We're using this symbology. They're using a literal number of
They're so fast, though. You've seen them with the screens. It's like you can have some food if you do these sums. Blook,
Yep.
blook, blook. It can do it so quickly.
Yeah.
I called it because I didn't want to misgender the chimp. Well, have you got any thoughts on this, Dane?
No, I'm enjoying listening though. Yeah, just been trying to remember things as you go along, but I keep forgetting every time we get to me. But just about the the Azores thing, just to quickly chuck it in for people that are listening, is that I've noticed the Azores are up here, and it's on what latitude did you say, Matt?
3/7.
Yeah. And Eden in Australia, it's the antipode. So the antipode's the other side of the planet. How do I say that? Anyway, the antipode from Azores to Eden, the antipode of the Azores is Eden. Eden's on 37 degrees, and that's on this 3/7. It seems pretty, that somebody else does know about maybe Azores being above sea once upon a time, and that it was like an Eden sort of a place. Maybe Atlantis, and yeah, they've named the antipode Eden. So I just want to chuck that
Eden,
in.
yeah.
Yeah, I've mentioned that
When was it
before.
named? Do you know? Is it like 1700, something like that?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, around 17, 1800s. Yeah, I think it was 1800 and something. But yeah, it's just curious, isn't it, that they'd, we could pick any name.
I have a quick question, Matt. These sevenths, is it like 7 up from the equator to the North Pole, 7 down? Is it 14, or is it 7 over the whole?
It's 7 from the equator to the North Pole, so 14 from the south to the north, and then 28 in total. And there are places at half intervals as well, so it would be 14ths or 56ths, as far as the entire circumference is concerned. So you see some of this east to west as well. Like I said, there's a bunch of places, including Denisova Cave, which is on this 56 network, east to west. There's a site that Andrew Collins and Greg Little are suggesting could be Atlantis in Cuba. Now, I've analysed that, and it's really important to my own research as far as metrology is concerned. And it's exactly 1/28th west of my prime meridian. So the if you draw a line, 1/28th west of Tiwanaku, it goes straight through Andrew Collins' site. It goes through nearly in the middle of the site, but it goes straight through the site. So it's something you see east to west as well as north and south, but you see distances in radians as well. So, for example, Paris, where the Louvre is in Paris, it has like it's known that there were Neolithic people in that part of Paris and not many other parts of Paris. And it's actually half a radian to Göbekli Tepe from Paris and half a radian to Egypt. And then Egypt to Göbekli Tepe is 1,080 kilometers. And that forms another ley line that goes all the way up to a system of circular mounds in Kazakhstan, which is like a mirror of the Lake Manicouagan. It's equidistant from Avebury on that same latitude. So
I must say, I'm still at a loss. Hearing what you said and considering what Dane said previously about the reasons for these stations, let's just call them stations for now. These buildings on these certain points. Why? It just doesn't make sense that you'd need to build these places for navigation. It just doesn't. You'd map coastlines and things like that, and there's other things that you would do that would be so much easier than building these huge structures and essentially having civilizations around those structures.
Well, I think the idea for me is if it dates back as far as I think it does, it's going to predate probably any form of writing and any useful utensils to write with. And if you've got to remember where you've left, say you've left Europe and you've gone to America, you need to remember, the place that I'm going back to is on this particular latitude, and it's this many intervals of 888, for example. You have this simple number system to navigate with that you don't actually have to use a map. You just know that you have to move this many intervals.
Wow, do you think they're going that far though? I mean,
I think that somebody was, yeah. I think it doesn't look like it was sapiens, if that makes sense. I think we came in later after it. I think once everything else went extinct and we were the last ones left, we might well have been the inheritors of this system, and we may not have fully understood what was going on. And I think it was us that built, it was Homo sapiens that built all these temples at these sites, which I think were much simpler structures in the past.
right. So that's back to your mounds again.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they were all.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, from a mythological perspective, the god of all this stuff is Saturn, the god of space and time, and that most of his iconography points back to, like he's got a stone sickle, for example, that he uses to cut off the genitals of his father, and that they do seem to a lot of his story does seem to be pointing back to, like, the Stone Age, essentially. I know you're saying like the Stone Age of the Stone Age, but prehistory. And you can see that you got this kind of cargo cult thing going on where people are going, oh my god, this is an amazing thing, let's, it must be an important place, let's build something around here. But for that, I would want something more than mounds.
Well, I think there's this interesting concept where Egypt's a very complicated place, because we think, there's all these different gods in Egypt, but it turns out these gods are slightly different from city to city and from time to time in Egypt.
Yeah.
And it's actually very, very complicated. And apparently in the ancient past, within history, in ancient Egypt, there were, arguments that, people from Heliopolis were like, no, our city is the place where the first sacred mound was built. And the people in Memphis would say, no, it was us. And the people in Karnak would say, no, it was us. We had the first sacred mound. And
they're always talking shit to those Karnakians, mate. Don't listen to them.
It's a case of, I think these mounds were probably all over the place. And because everyone's got the same creation story, wherever you go, they always think their mound is the first and most sacred mound. And it dates back to this common creation story where everything, comes about from this sort of central mound that emerges out of the ocean or a mountain. It's either a mound or a mountain, and sometimes it has a pantheon, sometimes it doesn't have a pantheon, sometimes it's the earth diver myth that you see in the Americas, where it's actually some sort of animal brings the earth up from under the water and builds an island or mound. That's the first mound of creation. And it's sort of like, I think if you're at one of these sacred mound sites, you might always think, oh, this one's massive, because you haven't seen any other mound, and you think this is the most important one, and this must be the first one. And then you're obviously, because it's at the core of your religion, which back then people knew was really old. They knew their religions were absolutely ancient. They're probably thinking, no, ours is the most ancient mound, and you're a bunch of liars. You can't, you're going against our particular specific religion. In the same way, we have rivalries in Islam and Catholicism and Protestantism, and it's all Abrahamic, and it all has similar origins. I suspect things like that were going on, back in, yeah.
I actually think that the origins of every story on Earth was mathematics. Like they maybe a conjunction pattern, counting years or what, counting.
Yeah.
Maybe and then another pattern with Venus, and it's got its own numeric pattern, and and everything had these patterns, and that's it. And then they wrote myths so that they could pass down the knowledge of these mathematical things, because it's like we've said before, to write a myth in mathematics, no one's going to listen. You're going to forget, But music, song, story, you remember these things, and I think it's really just back to. So we can remember the math, the geometry, navigation, everything. The harmonicists, as I've been learning lately, that's what they call themselves. With even Newton as well, the occultist, they were harmonicists.
Mm,
It's just kind of making it almost is kind of not boring, but almost kind of obvious almost at the end of it is the ratios of the fingers and the body, and they build all the temples and churches, etc., with to the design of the human body. But the Earth measure as well is the same as the human body. And then the distances to the planets and the sizes of the planets and the speeds, all again
yeah.
back to harmonic ratios. It's just this harmonic. I mean,
Mm.
I'm
I mean,
I
you
was
can't help
and it
you
just
can't
when
help but come to the conclusion. Sorry, mate. Go on.
well, when something's out of tune, like I'm a bit of a nut with it. If it's even slightly out of tune, someone's playing a guitar or a piano or something, and I just can't even stay in the room when it's a bit out of tune. I don't know why, it just drives me up the wall. But um, yeah, you can really notice when something is out of tune, even somebody that's not a muso. If you tune down a string kind of, a quarter of a turn, you're going to notice something's wrong, And I
Mm,
just think like these basic things, like these 9 goes back to 9, and these real basic, self-explanatory, self-referencing things are harmonically the same, macro, micro. It just, yeah,
yeah.
I think,
I mean,
you know,
you can trace all the extant modern religions back to this kind of philosophy. It's almost always that John Michel thing again. It's that holy city. It's in Plato. It's in any religion as of Plato, Christianity particularly, it is all based on this idea of a holy city and these measurements, and that you get your morals from there as well. I think it's morals because you instantly deal with dualities and this plus that equals that, and then you can track it all back to kind of a singularity in that life force. It's pretty obvious. I mean, even in China and in Persia, everywhere I've looked in Japan,
Yeah.
I haven't looked in Australia, and there's lots of places I haven't looked, but everywhere I have looked, it is this kind of it's the measurement system parabolized would be the best way of putting it, and it does look like the more you look into a religion, the more and the further you look back, it does seem to begin with something like that. Vedas.
Matt, just a quick one I just remembered. The circle you've got at the end of one of your videos, and you divide it into 6, something like, and it's like, what did you say that was to do with the megalithic yard and to get the
I don't think that was me. I've not really delved into megalithic yards that much. It might be somebody else.
some sort of measure? What was it, inches and miles, or in kilometers? What was it? Because I'm just trying to find these connecting. I saw Robert Edward Grant last night actually going into it a bit in a recent video. How
Oh, are we talking about the 5 to 6? So you get a 5-sided shape, 6-sided shape, and
no,
it's like,
how each measure is related to each other. And I think Matt, you showed in the very end of one of your videos, drew a 6-sided inside a circle. I'm sure it was you, and it
I
was.
don't think it was me.
well,
Was it?
I don't think it was me.
Yeah. But they're just trying to connect the different measures, inch, centimeters, metric, and
I,
imperial.
I think
And
I think the inch to the centimeter thing is something to do with the triple numbers. It's like your 111s and your. Do you remember we was it 1760? 1760 miles is sorry 660 miles is 1760 feet or something like that.
You've got 1,760 yards is 5,280 feet or 1 mile.
Well, yeah,
I'm getting things confused because I do that.
yeah. But
But
that's right.
there was
That's the Solfeggio scale.
wasn't it
The
six
first
six
2
six six.
But yeah, you see that 176 in the mile again, don't you? The what we call the modern mile is 1,760 yards.
Yeah.
660 feet, 220 yards is 7,920 inches, which is obviously the Earth in
Yeah.
measurement. Yeah. So there is something between these triple digit numbers, the meter, and whatever the conversion is on the other end to the foot and the mile and stuff like that. But isn't the mile from a slightly different system than the foot?
I think
I can't.
it's just it's 5,280 feet, isn't it? Which is 3 times 1,760 yards.
Mm.
I need to look up why there's that many yards in a mile. There must be some logic behind that. I've not really looked
I've
into
actually
it.
got it in front of me. I worked it out about a month ago, but I've worked out so many of the things in the last month I can't remember. It
That's
doesn't
the
make any
trouble.
sense. So I'll find out if when we regroup, because this has been a great chat. I'll figure it all out and I'll do a little presentation on it because it's right in front of me, but it makes no sense.
I mean, if we just go back to what Dane was saying about the numbers and everything, I mean, you were asking the question, why have they, built all these sites and these places? I mean, it could, as much as for navigation, I guess it could just be a sort of like an archive or number library that people can reference, and it can then be used to teach people.
That's what I think it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think more than anything, it would have been a teaching place because it would be nice to have these wayposts, but if you can't see them easily, or if they're in the middle of a continent, what are you going to do? You know what I mean? Because I'm thinking that they're not flying around. They're in a boat of some description.
But I mean, for me, the idea behind it is like if you have one person in your tribe or group that specializes in navigation, they might well have to remember a story with numbers in it so they know, oh, these people or this waypoint is there and this is the story on how to get there. It's that many.
Or you encode the numbers into names.
Could be,
Yeah.
Each
yeah,
letter's worth a
gematria.
value, and then you can
Yeah,
remember the name. That's it.
yeah,
That seems how it's still done now. Well, that's how we've got access to them now in many places.
Yeah.
yeah. That's a good idea. I mean, we remember stories and names and things very well, and that's sort of one of the things that some anthropologists have been suggesting, that the sort of the key difference between Homo sapiens, Denisovans, and Neanderthals is actually perhaps the Homo sapiens specialized in social intelligence, and maybe we weren't quite as good at problem solving. But
Mm.
because we had larger tribes, we could specialize. So we didn't have to be as smart because we could concentrate all of our efforts into one thing. But we because maybe we don't naturally have these sort of numerical gifts that these other species might have had, we have to create stories and gematria and numbers and things for us to be able to remember.
I think that's putting us down, though. We've got blooming microcomputers and quantum mechanics, and I think we do pretty well. I mean, you've got to imagine how far they might have come in this time as well.
Yeah.
But
I
I
mean,
don't think we're too bad.
yeah, well, that's the thing, is that we're sort of hyper specialists now, aren't we? People used to specialize, and then now we like really specialize. And if you study engineering, for example, most people aren't just an engineer; they're an electronics engineer or mechanical. Then it goes further. They work on specific things within these disciplines, and we're so hyper specialized that maybe it's sometimes harder for us to see the bigger picture. I know sometimes
So
it's
that might come back to your social intelligence thing, actually reinforcing what you were saying over what I was saying, because it's that socialization and specialization that gives an overarching intelligence, and they might have actually been more intelligent individually without
yeah,
that social skill to connect it all
yeah,
together. I like that
yeah.
very much, mate. That's great. Cool. So, Dana, did you have something particular that you wanted to go over today?
No, not really. Just one last bit of thought was maybe all these temples and pyramids and that they're like frets on a fretboard. So the
Yeah.
earth's like the strings, and they're just like putting their finger down, D. Maybe it's the secret chord that please the Lord. The David's, what is it? In that Leonard Cohen song. But this maybe it's a whole song. Maybe if we had figured out these different, that's an A flat, a D, right? I thought you had to play this tune or chord, but it just seems like almost like they're frets, like I was saying, from the King's Chamber to the equator is
Mm.
D and all that. It
Yeah.
seems very resonant. You know, I just really think that out of tune guitar thing is for me it does, because I know how much it drives me crazy. But
But
things
when
are tuned, we notice when things are even visually. They said about special effects last night in a video I watched about special effects. When it's quite obviously fake, even if it's really quick, the human brain is so good at picking up on the time, even if we couldn't tell you what it was,
yeah,
Mm.
we knew it's something, and,
Yeah.
and it's, and I think it's really to do with this. Maybe it's just veneration. Maybe it's just to venerate that we notice that the creator pushed his pen with these ratios So then we mirror it to venerate and give thanks, or it's a lot more than that, and it's to teach. And if there's cataclysms, we'll have it still. We can remember and learn again. Yeah, it could
I
be
mean,
all of the.
as
Yeah.
for that feeling, uh, that you do as a human, you might walk into a place. I mean, you blame it on so many other things, but you might walk into a place and get that creepy feeling up your back.
Mm.
And you can suggest that, when you're going into these holy places, that it feels, completely different. But a lot of that might be placebo or, just the way your brain works with what you've been told. But, and this was a strange thing to me. It was actually funny. When you think about it, when you're doing stuff like this, one of the ways of having that feeling illustrated to you is dowsing. We all know what dowsing is out there. So you get a couple of sticks or hold a forked stick, and when it twitches through convulsions in your own body, that there might be water underneath you. So I actually looked up to see, because I heard somebody said, "Oh yeah, the waterboards still use dowsing. I've seen them doing it." I'm like, no, they don't. So I looked it up. In England, all of the waterboards use dowsing to find burst pipes, new sources of water. All of them. They've all got a dowser, and it is the best. They say it's still the best way to do it. Isn't that
Oh,
something?
apparently, oil companies used to use dowsers, and they had a lot of success. So that's
Actually, on that is also, I think it's I've seen with the dowsing, the length of the wire or whatever they're using at the lengths are really important. And even again, going back to other technologies, they're starting to invent the lengths of these copper wires and how many winds. Like again, these 144s and harmonic numbers, when they use those, you get hugely different and more significant results. So
I mean,
it's yeah.
you've
Yeah, I think the length of that wire gives you different things like water underground or gold or whatever. But I think that length of it matters.
Wow, that's really interesting. I wonder if you could start putting it to like harmonic numbers and things like that, and you would have more success.
Yeah.
Hmm. It's that
I think we lost him.
Yeah. Still recording. Oh, we might have lost him.
Maybe he'll be back.
Yeah, because we're still going. He might just rejoin.
Yeah, I say we give it a couple of minutes.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I think I'm trying to think what else. Before.
there we go. Sorry
Are
about
you
that,
back?
guys.
What
Yeah, mate.
happened?
Yeah, the internet's a dick. So I have a little thing. It's nothing. I mean, it is quite big, but it's not massive to you guys. But I do like the fact that it's done. So what I've been doing over these last couple of weeks, apart from finishing the goddamn book, is I was looking at the structure of the harmonic numbers, your 108s, your 216s, all these ones. And so I'll explain this to the people out there so I don't insult either of you two, or insult you guys out there, but I'll explain these harmonic numbers to you, and I kind of got to the bottom of it and how many there are. So when I look at all these old systems, the counting they're using is a decimal, and they're using base 10 and base 12, essentially. You can call it base 60, but they're using the numbers 10 and 12.
Yeah.
So when you look at these harmonic numbers, your 108s, etc., 72, there are several types. And the reason why they're harmonic is that they are divisible by different numbers. Between 1 and 12 is the bracket that I've limited it to, because that seems like what they're doing.
Mm.
There are certain numbers that are divisible by all the numbers apart from 7. Other numbers are divisible by all numbers apart from 5, 10, 11, things like that. You often find 5, 7, 10, 11 aren't very divisible at all. 9, less so. 3, very divisible. 2, obviously, lots of numbers divisible by 2. So when I was looking at these numbers, obviously there are different sets, and those sets are how many of these numbers 1 to 12 they are divisible by. So I started to do the calculations myself to find out how many different types of harmonic numbers there are. I got up to 11 different types. So what one might be, it's divisible by 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11. There you go. There's a kind of harmonic number, and there might be 20 of those. Of these different types of harmonic number, it turned out, and it makes sense, there are 24 different types between 1 and, is it 27720, which is the first number divisible by all the numbers 1 through 12.
Oh,
So between 1 and that number, there are 24 different kind of harmonic numbers. And you could literally pick one of those numbers to be divisible by whatever you're working with. We've also lost Dane now, but I'm sure.
oh no.
But yeah, so that was a bit of a breakthrough of mine, and I used I did half of it myself. I did 11 myself, and I'm like, if I've got to look at every bloody harmonic number between 1 and 27720, I'm going to be here all day. So I asked Elon Musk to help me with Grok, and he did, because he's very kind like that. And I got Grok to do it for me, and yeah, it came out with weird divisible by 8 numbers like 64 and things like that. First, I'm like, Grok, this is not right, mate. Sort it out. And yeah, we whittled it down to there are 24 different ones, which kind of makes sense, seeing as it's between 1 and 12.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you why. I couldn't tell you mathematically why, but it makes a poetic sense.
It'd be good to see that represented visually in some sort of format.
I asked it to do that, and it just gave me a horizontal plan of all the numbers with like 2 of it. It seemed a bit too complex, but I'll wait 6 months and ask it again, because it might be able to do something a bit better in 6 months' time.
Yeah, true.
It's something I don't think I want to spend my time doing. It would be a fantastic thing to have, but it would take so long.
Yeah.
Although I wonder if you could kind of do a spreadsheet kind of thing with it. And
You
I'm
probably
just not
could.
good enough at maths, Matt. I'm not. I've been pulled into this arena. My speciality is more decoding symbols and understanding how to extract the information from the symbols. It just so happens that the symbols brought me here.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's what happens when you start to look at this. You start out in one discipline and you get dragged into things that maybe you're not so comfortable with, but you have to look into these things.
Yeah, we're all compelled to do it. I know Dane is.
Yep.
We're on missions, aren't we, mate?
Oh yeah.
On,
Oh my
on,
God.
on missions from gods that we don't even believe in. Mercury sent me here.
Yeah. It's like that. Yeah. Well, like we know they're harmonically all distanced and all that. I think, yeah, like musical notes, maybe inaudible, obviously, but I think all these things affect us, and we're affecting them. I'd imagine. We probably affect Mercury and Saturn and all these things equally. I think it's this equal exchange.
Yeah, an exchange of some type.
Yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing's it's bewitching and bewildering at the same time. There's always like it's like a carrot on a stick. It's like I'm one question away from an ultimate answer, and all you do get your answer, but then there's 100 more questions to be asked after it.
Yeah.
What are you looking into? Sorry, mate, go on.
I've just thought of something that I saw years back, but it was the Heart Math Institute, and you guys might have seen it, where he was in his lab, the polygraph inventor, and he had someone who bought him a cactus. He was in his lab, sterile place, late at night one night. He puts the polygraph on the cactus, and he's thinking, "Oh, how will I get a reaction?" He was just like late, thinking of something crazy, and he decides, "Oh yeah, I'll go and get a lighter, and I'll light, I'll burn it." Anyway, he doesn't move. He doesn't even get out of his chair to go and get the lighter. He just had the thought. And as soon as he had that thought, the needle went crazy on the polygraph. And he just, he's late at night. He's thinking, I'm tripping. He tries it again and it works. But the graph isn't as crazy. It's sort of the needle's moving, but it's not as mad. He does it another time or 2 times, and the needle stops moving. He realizes later, in hindsight, and they repeat this study, that the plant knew he was bluffing. The plant knew, the cactus knew, that he's after the 3rd or 4th attempt, that his heart wasn't in it. So, and they did this with yogurt. They do it with anything, a leaf. It don't matter. Doesn't matter what you pick. So, and it's instantaneous. That whole, like, spooky action at a distance immediately. Thousands of miles, whatever. Yeah. So this everything's conscious. And I mean, these Heart Maths Institute things with the yogurt, the cactus, doesn't matter, is there's no debate. There's no argument.
So that makes me think that the first religion that we know of was a kind of animism, where that life force is in everything and it's all conscious in one way or another, and you can trace it all back to that same life force. It's all the same. It's all that one thing. It's the one thing of the alchemists.
Yeah, I just love the fact that the intent. So when we're in court, when we're in court, they're trying to prove, well, they used to. These days, it's all a bit corporate, but it was intent. If the intent wasn't there, it's manslaughter. If the intent was there, premeditated,
Yes,
blah,
murder.
blah, blah.
Yeah.
So but the plant, everything around us, even like the birds, magpies. I've got a deep relationship with the magpies. They've been coming for a while, a year or so, and they just since then, other animals have started to be sort of more friendly toward me. I don't know. It's been this more. I don't know. It's almost like they know or something, and it's been this strange.
Sounds like Rupert Sheldrake's morphogenic field or something similar to me.
Yeah.
We're not hippies, by the way, everybody. It's just that when you start studying this thing, weird things happen to you and you start putting stuff together and you can't help but see this stuff. We don't know if we're right, but that's what we feel like. Well, we're definitely not hippies.
I think something that's sort of coming into the mainstream again, and I say again because I think these ideas were sort of philosophical mainstream a couple of thousand years ago in different cultures, is we're now starting to think of reality rather than just things that happen within reality. So if I'm talking to you, I'm creating a sound, and that sound travels, it causes something to vibrate in your ears, for example, but there's always a time delay. Even with light, there's a time delay with light. But there's people now talk about things like string theory and other things. What is the fabric of reality? People were looking at these questions thousands of years ago, ideas like Brahma, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And, Dane was saying, spooky action at a distance. We know everything in the universe is inherently linked in some form or another. And if you change the spin of an electron in your bedroom doing something, it could actually change the spin of an electron on the other side of the known universe instantaneously. So everything is somehow linked.
Entangled.
Yes, exactly. And it's this whole reality question that we're trying to get to the bottom of.
Yeah,
and people have been.
It seems like it's something to do with this thing that we're studying. If there's been any knowledge about it, it's in here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's I think a lot of people think that these ideas that we have now about the nature of reality are the result of modern physics, ideas that were coming about in the late 1800s and early 1900s. But when you start to look into philosophy, it seems like people have been asking these questions as far back as writing goes. So
at least,
at least. So it could very well be that people were coming to conclusions. If you get modern day physicists, they often hate each other because they have rival theories and they're adamant that theirs is correct and the other guy's is wrong. And even the Big Bang theory, there's I think there's as many physicists now that have got different ideas as to the conventional Big Bang idea. Because the trouble with the Big Bang is another thing we can only think of it within this universe, and it could be that it relies on phenomena outside of our reality for this to occur.
Well, probably. I mean, you hear lots of paradoxical arguments that still, scientists have a smug grin on the face. Oh, you're looking for a first principle. There might not be one. But it's like, well, okay, then what comes before the Big Bang or what comes before whatever you're suggesting? And they're like, you're asking the question wrong. And it's like, No, you're just as religious as the guy down the church. That's what it
Yeah.
is. You know, give me one miracle and I can I can give you the universe. Well, sorry, mate, but it's still a miracle. Well, you've got to say as well, look, all these things that we're studying are attached to religions.
Yes.
Yeah, so there's that about it as well. You know, they're directly attached to religions. So there's that spiritual aspect there straight away.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because certainly modern religions, of the last sort of couple of thousand years, it seems that there's more than one level to the religion. There's sort of like the peon level where the grunt has to just be submissive, and then you read between the lines and you start to see things like you have to find the direction of Mecca, which is, like I said, it's the zenith node of a bunch of omphalos sites. It's like, well, it's telling you, there's something to do with navigation and geodesy there, or circumambulate the Kaaba 7 times. Well, does that reflect the 7 latitudes? They're doing it anti-clockwise. Which way does the world spin? Anti-clockwise. It's like, well, you look into circumambulation. You see that in lots of religions, Lingham's, ancient Celtic religions. I mean, if you look at...
I was going to say, it always seems, as with the Kaaba, it always seems to be linked back to the goddess and that matrix that you could call it. You know, the Kaaba's got a silver vagina on there and they kiss a black meteoritic stone, and that cube's got feminine aspects to it as well. It's just, it seems to me that they're showing you the feminine matrix, which reminds me that one of my main discoveries, I did it outside John Michel. It was what gave me the route to come get to here in the first place, and that was his pattern with the triangle and the moon at the top, the pyramid, the moon, and the earth geometry. Oh God, I've lost my thread, guys. What were we talking about?
You were talking about like this sort of
vaginas. That's right. So Sheila Nagig, I found it in Sheila Nagig. I was actually looking for a pattern in tarot cards because I could see there was a geometry that was getting repeated. And I'd spent like 2 days just drawing over tarot cards, not quite getting to the bottom of it. And I recorded one of my first few videos for YouTube. And at the end of it, I put a picture of Sheila Nagig on it. She's kind of opening. Do you know who Sheila Nagig is, everybody? It's like a feminine, scully-looking woman. Yep. She's got her legs akimbo and she's opening up her genitals, and you can see inside. She's often on medieval churches, but that figure goes back as far as Göbekli Tepe. It's literally at that site. So I'm like, why is she on all these churches? And it was just, I'd started to talk about this pattern that I discovered, and I just put a picture of her up because I'd been in a medieval church that had that in there when I was in Wales. And I was like, hang on a minute, her head looks like it's the shape of that moon, and then the way her legs were akimbo, it would fit with the pyramid. So I put it all together, and it was like, whoa, this does actually fit. And that's where I found that pattern off my own back. But everywhere I looked, it seemed to be saying this is the feminine matrix. She's opening up her vagina to show you her insides, her reproductive system. So I described it as something like the crystalline structure at the base of reality, something like that. If you can get the analogy, it's just poetry, but
well, it's often described as
it seems to be.
The womb is kind of the portal into our reality, isn't it? It's the entrance into this realm.
Yeah, exactly that. And that's what I was thinking. So it seems that they're thinking this way, but when you look at it, maybe it is. Maybe it is.
Yeah. Well, the center of the Taurus thing is, rest, isn't it? And counter space, or like a sink, as Ken Wheeler. I'm going back to Ken again, but that's even the axis mundi, like emanating from the center. All this emanate, even from our own heart or soul. It's always from the center, emanating from the center, and always finding the center seems to be very important. Whether it's in a scale of music, whether it's in navigation, it just seems like they're always trying to find this golden holy meads or medium.
And that is a still point as well. That you said the pole a minute ago. The way they saw the pole was that the pole itself is still like the axle of a wheel, and then the heavens are spinning around it. Well, that
Yeah.
pole, if that's an access point to the imperial realm, where reality comes from, that fiery realm of archetypes and whatnot, and you can get there
Yeah.
through that axis point. Like you said, like the center of the eye of an hurricane, or the middle of a magnet, or
Yeah.
center of the Taurus. Yeah.
Yeah. I've even heard the iris, the iris, the black. It's another
Yeah.
one,
Yeah.
a sync. Yeah, and even the sun, at the moment, actually, if you look at the sun, there's a huge hole on the sun at the moment, and a sunspot or whatever, and it's black. Every time you see one, even on the small ones, you can see it's black inside, almost like you can see stars behind the moon. So behind the sun, it's see through. As soon as you can see these big holes, the one at the moment's massive, but yeah, you can see just almost through. You can see through the sun. It just seems like this again, a sink, some kind of
Black hole.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Or
Omphalos,
white hole, however you want to look at it. Yeah, an omphalos. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
It doesn't just mean navel. I think it's derived. Both, the ancient Greek word for navel and womb are both derived from omphalos, or the other way around, something like that. They're very intrinsically linked.
I'll have a look at the etymology right now, because I can't help but think phallus as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's that sort of duality, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just went on etymology online and typed in the word etymology like an idiot. Omphalos. Omphalos, sacred stone. Omphalos, literally navel, later also hub, from PIE, ombhalo, from root knob. Knob with an H, though. Navel. Yeah, navel. Omphalic. Okay, I can dig that.
But I mean, Delphi's really, I think Delphi's a very important site for a number of reasons. I mean, it's very strongly associated with the sky god Apollo. It's that kind of overthrowing the serpent thing, because before Apollo, it was really dedicated to Pythia and Gaia, really. And
Well, actually, the mythological story of the Omphalos is it's the same stone that Rhea fed to Zeus, to Saturn. I'm mixing up Roman and flipping Greek here, so let me just stick with the Roman. That Saturn had been born, and his father Caelus, who is Uranus in the Greek pantheon, like infinity, space. There was too much space, and no more children could be had. So there was Saturn, who's like the time god, and Rhea's like, his mum's like, yo, you're gonna have to cut his willy off with this stone sickle, else we can't have any more kids. So he does that, and then Saturn gets all jealous of all these other of all of his children, and he's worried, like Herod in the Bible. It's that same kind of idea that he's going to eat all the children. And so Rhea feeds Saturn's missus feeds like an effigy of Jupiter, which is a stone in swaddling, feeds it to Jupiter, feeds it to Saturn. Sorry, it's late at night, and it feeds it to Saturn, and he can't digest it. It ends up like puking up the other gods that he's already swallowed, and then the rest of the world comes into. Well, what that is, and this is still in alchemy, is that stones, Saturn's time, stones are unable to be manipulated by time. They don't fall prey to time in the same way as everything else does. So that this Omphalos stone, relating back to what we were saying before about it being a fractal of the rest of the measurements in that place, and also being a central navel, that is not corruptible by time, because the numbers we're using for these measurements are numbers, and they are pre-time, and they are pre-universe, the part of that imperial realm. So the Philosopher's Stone is, and I'm 100% sure of this, the Philosopher's Stone is this number system.
Yeah.
Most particularly, it's that diagram with the seven and the Earth and the moon on there and all that stuff. That's what it is particularly, but really, ultimately, it's this whole number system. Definitely, I'm 100% sure and have proof.
Yeah.
So it's not it's not some secretion derived from a bunch of piss from like Newtonian era scientists.
No, it's not. I mean, Newton himself was obsessed with finding out the actual scale of the Earth. He was obsessed with it. And when you look into a lot of his stuff, Well, one of the first things I looked at with Newton in the occult realm was his diagram of the Temple of Solomon. And I threw that pattern over it that I keep talking about. And sure enough, the Temple of Solomon is built to that pattern. It's all the same stuff. It's all the same stuff. All these holy cities are that pattern, all of them. Like without any, I mean, I must have looked at 20 different holy cities, the sky cities, these imaginal cities, and they're all relating that pattern.
Have you read much of Vitruvius?
I haven't, no. I try not to read, mate, weirdly enough.
I understand. I try and stay away from some things before I've come to my own conclusion because I worry that I'm going to get contaminated with other people's ideas.
Yeah.
Somebody said, do you have a quote for that? Can you show me your source for it? It's like, I'm doing science, mate. I do calculations. I don't need the other things. I do calculations.
Yeah, you've derived it from first principles, basically.
Yes.
Yeah. I was thinking that yesterday about even like, getting on a ship and sailing and go, okay, boys, go and check if it is 7,920 miles, because I reckon like with that music scale stuff and all the harmonic numbers in that whole, chart of the, I've sent you that chart 1,000 times, Ryan, that one of the Pythagorean music tuning scale. And I even found 364 days the other day. I showed you that 75 numbers when you take away the sharps and the flats. And then you get the 364 days in the year, just using, with this, and it's insane. You get everything just using that. I swear to God, that's
the only problem with all this stuff, as far as proving things scientifically, is almost always there's a little tiny margin for error because the universe itself isn't so perfect. And that they'll go, and so if we're going to talk scientists,
I call those
say again, mate.
I call those oscillations, those little tiny fractions of a, like it's not exactly 7,920 miles or whatever, it's always, there's nothing is that exact. Even when Randall Carlson talks about Saturn or Mercury and the moon size and, it's not exactly 2,160 miles, but it's close,
It's really close.
Yeah. But when the Earth's close and the sun's close and, you get so many closes and it's like, well, come on,
It's almost like, our balls are a bit different size, boobies, a little bit, they're not, all these types.
Quite slightly different directions,
But the other thing is, like when you listen to, say, AI music or even guys that that have studied at Berkeley, I can't listen to them, most of them. They're just boring as, it's like watching grass grow or paint dry. There's
because
just
they're too perfect.
Oh, it's so perfect, and they're just so good, and I'm going home. I'm over it. But when I see a bunch of guys up there hitting a few bung notes, spitting on each other, getting into it, I don't know, having a great time, I'm into it. I'm like, let's go. But it's
you're in the band, mate.
It's just kind of I think it's for that novelty. Is that the word? That little bit of mystery, that little bit of everything perfect is just awful. It'd be torture. So,
it would. There'd be no room for error and room to learn. I love that Japanese art that basically takes broken pottery and then they join it back together with a little bit of gold, and that's like, that's the imperfection.
Well, without a little bit of uncertainty, everything's completely predictable, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Is that the free will principle of the universe in action? Is that Pythagorean comma the way that the universe is able to operate and still have free will, because it's not all absolutely to that matrix, which would be a kind of tyranny?
Some sort of fuzzy state between yes and no, left and right.
Superposition.
Going back to that 364, that alignment I told you about earlier from the Ring of Brodgar that goes to Avebury, Stonehenge, Dankley Shrine, and down to that Python's temple. The entire length of that ley line is 3,640 miles, which is
unbelievable.
Yeah.
364,
And that's obviously to the nearest integer, each season is 91 days, isn't it? Summer to, autumn to autumn to winter to spring, because it's not, you can't make it exactly 365.24 or whatever it is. The nearest integer is 91.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So the Ben stone, the one that was projected, or it's also called the Phoenix stone, I've heard it called. But anyway, the
Yeah.
Phoenix and gematria is 91. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I've been finding a lot of those names lately again, Ryan, with more names, and they're all adding up to the same ones.
Yeah,
Same
yeah.
numbers. Yeah.
I mean, the Phoenix does. When I tend to look into the Phoenix, it looks more like it's drugs and things like that. But then you go slightly left, and it's that the Ben bird and all that stuff, and that does seem more related to maths. Again, I think the reason why you'll go from like things about ley lines, then you suddenly, why is it maths, and now why is it spiritual things and morals, and why is it now Kundalini yoga? And it's well, A, it's one system. B, the thing that unites them all is that life force serpent. That is the uniting feature. So I think it was one system, and the fact that we are all one school, and the fact that we're getting a bit confused from time to time, like why is the Phoenix drugs and the Ben stone maths? Well, you'll probably find if you studied the Phoenix hard enough and looked at its origin, that it probably would have been something more like the Ben stone.
Yeah.
If we go back to Vitruvius for just a second,
yeah,
he was this Roman engineer. He was around sort of just over 2,000 years ago, before the time of Christ, and he was quite interesting because he was pretty much the only Roman engineer to sort of document anything, and he wrote something like 10 books on engineering principles of the time. And he was saying that all of these sort of ratios and proportions were handed down, to the sort of the Greeks, Romans, and Egyptians by sort of much more ancient structures. And he said he literally uses the term the ancients. So this guy more than 2,000 years ago saying like, we don't know where these ideas came from. They were handed to us by the ancients, and we can see them in the proportions of their temples. And to this day, we, the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians, we all still use these same principles when choosing the location of building a new temple and deciding what proportions it should have and how many pillars it should have, for example. But this guy, he's writing about this thousands of years ago, and he's the one that came up with the proportions of the human body to which Da Vinci drew this Vitruvian man. And Da Vinci is not the only person. Lots of artists have drawn Vitruvian man from the instructions of Vitruvius.
Wow.
And I overlaid the Vitruvian man over the earth. And it's interesting because where the fingers touch is very close to the Delphi latitude.
all right.
And so it shows that these proportions of man, because you can from these proportions, then you can actually derive things like phi and pi, and all of these
Have you ever put the that John Michel style pattern? I'll just call it the pattern in future. But have you ever put the pattern over your points? Because
I haven't.
that's divided. That's a circle divided by 14. When not what John Michel did, but what I found in it. It's a circle divided by 14. So maybe, and the Vitruvian man's drawn to it. The Vitruvian man's like 2 or 3 different things. It's a slightly altered squared circle. It's the star cuts from the. Do you call it the star cut? Where you get a square or a rectangle and you join the corners to the sides, and then you get all the measurements. Do you know about the star cut?
I didn't know that it was called that.
What do you guys? It's got a few names. That's the thing.
I didn't even know it had a name, to be honest.
All right. So you see where in the early occult, you see in like Middle Ages occult, like in Henry Cornelius Agrippa's 3 books of occult philosophy, because he was drawing Vitruvian men in it. You'll see them with their arms up, or some with their arm out, some of them in a pentagram, and he's always drawing that with the star cut, that star cut diagram.
Yeah.
Picture here, and so. As far as I can see, Vitruvian man is that star cut diagram and that pattern, that 14-sided pattern, the John Michel one that I was just on about. So maybe if you look at your work and put that pattern, I'll send you a PNG of it later. Have a see, because it might. I would say almost certainly, actually.
Yeah.
Look, I found that pattern, mate, on cave walls.
Okay.
I've literally found bulls on cave walls drawn with that, like 100% drawn with that pattern.
Yeah.
So it might be really worth you. We can
Yeah.
come together like Power
Yeah.
Rangers.
Yes. That's what I was thinking about you two as well with these with your 7 latitudes, Matt, and your heptagram stuff. It's like you guys, you know, yeah, there's going to be some kind of little mystery solved, I reckon, between the two of you there.
Yeah.
And even, you know, obviously the easy ones are the 7 rays of light, you know, that come from the pure light. You know, they're the sort of simple ones. Why maybe these numbers
Well,
were
there's
chosen.
12 around the outside as well. So it's musical. It's
Yeah.
basically 7, 3, 4, and 12. So yeah, it's very, very musical. It's almost the same as the Zodiac. The way the Zodiac's laid out, there's lots of polarities between all those star signs, and that's 3, 4, 7, and 12 again. So it's all music,
Yeah.
mate.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, let's look at start wrapping this up because we're on a couple of hours
Yeah.
now. I was going to
I'm
say
gonna
to you,
put,
Matt, last time me and Dane spoke, we decided that we're going to start a Discord, which has now been put up, and just like get as many people as like us as we can together, and not have it as like I don't know if you've been on Discord, but not so messy. I just want a small area for people coming looking at our work, but
Yeah.
mostly just categories of us. So Dane's got a section, I got a section. I'd love you to come on there as well if you're up for it. And you
Yeah,
can just
I'm
promote your
definitely up
work,
for it.
do what you want. Wicked. What I'll do, I'll send you a
yeah.
link later. And anybody else watching, I'll put a link to the Discord at the bottom. Especially if you're doing the work of all
Yeah.
these varieties, whether it's the energy stuff or music or the harmonics or the geometry or the
Yeah.
geometry.
Astronomy, anything.
Um, anything that you think, yeah, astronomy. If you're into the tarot, anywhere where you find this stuff, even if you're into looking into the religions and the myths, please come and join us. We're literally starting off. We've called it the Jedi Academy with a DJ EDI, as in the Jed pillar
Yeah.
of Osiris, just because it was funny.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just want to create an area where we can do the work and ask questions and get help and basically share our
Mm.
stuff, even if it's just a selfish way. I've made a new video. Here you go. You want
Yeah.
to talk to me about it? Cool.
Yeah.
Are we a
Oh,
slow
that sounds
burner?
good.
I'd love to have Matt stuff on there, just with all the 7 latitude, the 888 stuff, all that, so I can really start to lock it in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if any time you come up with something, what we're going to do, maybe in a couple of months, I'm going to start a new channel on YouTube and just have it dedicated to anybody that's
Oh,
on the
100%.
Discord. If they want to like get all their heads together and talk something out like we have tonight, we can do that
Yeah.
too.
I've
Yeah.
been having the same idea, a YouTube channel dedicated to you having on like someone's recent research, and they've done maybe a month of whatever, and they've come up with all these things. It's sort of like once I move away from something, I forget. As you know, there's so much to
Yeah.
retain, so it's good
Yeah.
to sort of do it at the end of that month's sort of solid stint. So yeah, a great
Yeah.
idea, Ryan. Yeah,
Yeah.
the channel. Yeah,
So if you're up for that, Matt, I'd love you to join us because my word, you've been a mine of information. It's not a
Yeah, I
gold
mean,
mine. It's like a copper mine or something like
a
that.
tin mine.
Tin mine.
I'm half
Get back to
Cornish. It'll be a
Cornwall.
tin mine.
Yeah.
yeah.
Wicked.
Great work,
Oh,
Matt.
that's
As
wonderful.
you do. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Really glad I met you. Really glad I met you.
Yeah, good to
Right,
speak to you
everybody.
both. Cheers, guys.
Anybody got any videos that they've just done or anything like that?
No,
I'm
nothing
working
big.
on
Anywhere they
some.
want to point people? Sorry, say again.
I'm working on a couple of videos, but it's going to be weeks before they're out. They're sort of a couple of years in the making, to be honest. But they'll be out soon. But
Anything you'd like to divulge? Have you got a title or a general area?
it's kind of an introduction to this sort of more. I don't know. I guess what we're sort of covering here. Before I was mostly talking about Atlantis, and now I'm trying to get into the sort of numbers behind the geodesy and why I think certain things are happening. I'm trying to keep it as rationalist as possible at the moment.
Trying.
Because I think I think ultimately you, even as a rationalist, you come to dead ends unless you start to look at things at least more philosophically, possibly even beyond. But the reason I'm trying to keep
Sorry, mate. I have a disclaimer for things like that, and it's just as simple that perhaps they were thinking the way they saw it,
yeah
and straight away you don't. It doesn't have to be put onto you anymore Because you could talk about Christians who believe that this guy died and was resurrected. You know what I mean? And it's not like I believe it happened, but they certainly do.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm trying to keep it sort of rationalist at the moment is because I found so many alignments where you've got like the biggest sites or the most sacred sites that are forming these, these ley lines effectively. It's irrefutable. You can't say, oh, that's wrong. You can't deny it. It's absolutely true. The reasons behind it are certainly more speculative.
Yeah.
But it's at a point now where there's too many of these coincidences, and it's also to the point where I've started to predict places. I found a geoglyph in Kazakhstan that it might not have been discovered by anyone. It might have been discovered by somebody who lives there, but I can't get a hold of him. He's found a bunch of geoglyphs in Kazakhstan, and he's impossible to reach. And I may have found a new one, or he may have found it, but I found it through predictive modeling, and I'm finding other places, and I'm convinced there's loads of places in the Rub al Khali desert that are going to be revealed over time based off of my predictive modeling. So I think, I've gone off on a tangent here. We've got any videos coming out, but yeah.
That's fucking awesome, yeah.
Yeah,
really to be able to predict where things might be in that cave painting or whatever by using your method. I mean, that's some validation of the method.
Yeah. Well, the same with they keep doing besides what's they think might be under the pyramids now, but what's inside the pyramids, the extra cavities. Well, they're all whenever they found them, it's always exactly on that pattern that I found.
Yes. Yeah.
So, you can make these predictions because it is hard mathematics. I mean, I personally enjoy the myths and the mysteries as well, and the speculations, but they can remain speculations because they're just bolt-on things to this hard maths that we've been doing.
Yeah.
That's been doing us. You got anything coming up, Dane? Anything coming up?
Actually, I've got to record a little intro after I get off this for Stephanie and I's video we've been putting together for nearly 12 months. But it's mainly about the Jules Verne, Agatha Christie, and all these authors that put in all these numbers, put in all these sorts of little coded lines and stuff in there, all about this stuff, but all these authors seem to be involved in the great work in some way and encoding it in their novels.
Wicked. You got to press gang Stephanie onto this Discord as well.
Absolutely do. Yeah.
Yeah, wicked.
Yeah.
All right, what have I got coming up? I just did a half. There's a film called The Holy Mountain by a guy called Alejandro Jodorowsky, who gets into all the mysticism stuff. I just did a video, part 1, dissecting that film. That's been about it. I've just been finishing I have finished my book. I've just got to go through it from the beginning and make it make sense now.
Yeah, good luck.
But aside from that, everybody, you can find me, Dane, and now Matt on the Discord. I won't be on there tonight because it's 20 past midnight. I'll be having a cup of tea and going to bed, but we'll see you on there over the forthcoming days, hopefully.
Awesome.
Excellent. Although saying that, I'm recording this, so I can put this up when I want to. So yeah, come on the Discord, come and have a chat to us, especially if you've got any questions about all this stuff. Come and talk to me, Matt, or Dane. Although there's a section on the Discord where you can just ask a question and we can all join in, and it's not on anyone's personal part. Right. Thank you very much, everybody. Good times, guys. Really enjoyed meeting you, Matt.
Good to meet you guys too.
Dane, I love you to bits, mate.
Love you guys.
Okay, everybody.
See you guys.
Love you right there too.
Cheers,
Be good. Stop misbehaving yourselves. Do more mathematics.
Don't be
Read less.